Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is the second part of food prep planning, preserving, day in the life of my kitchen, all that sort of thing for March so far. So I'm a little behind on getting these out. Someone commented in the last one that no one would know that I'm behind if I didn't tell you, but the people who follow me on places like Instagram and Facebook and stuff have seen some of these things come up before I get a chance to do the video, because I tend to post sort of real time with that. I know realistically I should probably save things and then like post it when the video's out, and then I can link the video. I'm sure that's probably the right marketing approach, but marketing, and it's a lot of effort. So generally speaking, I post things on Facebook and Instagram and things like that as I'm doing it, and then eventually it comes out in a video as well. So the thing with some of the stuff that I'm making too in these videos is that until I go back and watch the videos, I can't tell you exactly how I did it. Because I have notes and stuff, but sometimes I have to sit there and watch the video and go, so how many cups of that did I put in there? Because I record the whole process. You don't necessarily get to see the whole process, but I record the whole process. I just turn the camera on and let it run, and then I edit it later. So each of these videos that ends up being about 25 minutes generally has about 3 hours of footage at a minimum, sometimes more. So sometimes I have to go back and watch what I did to be able to share the actual ratios and stuff that I used, or even to be able to remember them for next time, which, you know, has its pros and cons. Darryl always says that generally speaking with my standard cooking, nothing ever tastes exactly the same twice, and sometimes that's really not a bad thing, because it means that, you know, it keeps the interest in the food. I don't know though, because that's when it comes to be a bit of a downfall for sharing recipes and stuff, which I've said before. A lot of the stuff that I end up sharing takes a long time for me to share, because I have to get people to test it. I have to decide on that base recipe, get people to test it and make sure it works, and then share it, because I use these things in a very fluid process. When I bake and I cook and all the rest of it, I tend to just throw things in until it tastes right and not necessarily measure it. So anyway, I've just randomed off. So as per usual, it's like 5:30 in the afternoon that I'm standing out here doing this. So I'm tired, it's been a long day, and I'm going to get the voiceover done for this one, because I should have done it yesterday and I didn't get to it, so I need to get it done. And this is the second part of March. So this is just after I've come back from the supply run, so I think it's around about like the 9th, 10th, 11th of March that covers for this particular video, working on lots of that zucchini that I got. So enjoy watching, and I will see you again at the end. So as I said, I had to start with the zucchini. So anyone who didn't watch the grocery haul, I got 30 kilos of zucchini free. He was given it free, and he passed some on free to me as well. These boxes were rain damaged, so they had those little bits of sort of slimy damaged skin on them, which just meant that they had to be processed really quickly before any mold could take hold and then take over the box. So it meant trimming them and using them up nice and quickly, and I was all for that, especially if free. I would have paid for the boxes. I would have paid $5 a box or whatever if that was what it was as well for this kind of quality, because there was plenty to be used in there, and whatever wasn't usable went to the pigs. So it's not exactly wasted, because our pigs will eat those scraps, or the chickens, but generally speaking, large amounts of scraps like that we tend to give to the pigs. So I had all of those to work on. So what I did was I cleaned them up and I trimmed them. I just needed to cut any bits that were soft on them or discolored, cut the ends off them, took some of the peel off that was a little bit spotted and things like that. But most of it was usable anyway. At this point, it was more about aesthetics than actual, growth of anything on them. It was more just that it didn't look real great, which I know turns some people off, but I'm pretty used to dealing with that sort of thing. So Lorcan helped me chop a whole lot of it up. One of the first things I made was zucchini butter, which I did post on Facebook and people asked me about, so I will make sure to let people know that this video is out. But zucchini butter is basically big chunks of zucchini cooked down to a butter, no different than like apple butter or pear butter or anything like that. So I cut up a whole lot of zucchini and filled the pot, knowing that once you fill the pot, it's going to reduce to like a third of the liquid, a third to a half sort of thing, because you're cooking out the water from it. So Lorcan helped me chop up a whole lot of the zucchini that day, practicing knife skills and that kind of thing. So we were cutting it all up just into smallish, evenly sized shapes, just so that it's all going to cook down at the same time. We added some really big elephant garlic cloves to it as well, and I grabbed some sprigs of rosemary from the garden. So we just cut the tips off the rosemary and stuck the whole sprigs in with a glug of ghee and some oil. Then you turn it on and you let it cook. So that glug of ghee and oil is going to stop it from burning to the bottom, a little bit like when you're like caramelizing onions and you add that little bit of fat, just so that there's some liquid in the bottom for those onions to start cooking before they burn. So that's what that oil and butter is doing. You want to cook it on a medium heat. You want it to bubble a little bit, but if it bubbles too viciously, then there's the potential for it to burn on the bottom, but also for it to splash everywhere. I do have one of those, you know, like saucepan guard things, but I can't, it got damaged. I find them very flimsy. I find that the netting always ends up popping out of the circular bit. I don't know what they're called, splatter guards or whatever they are. So you want to keep it hot enough that it's you know, it's reducing, but not so hot that it's throwing those big bubbles up which can splash everywhere. And you just want to mix it every now and again to make sure that you're picking stuff up off the bottom. Again, I find it's very similar to caramelizing onions. You want to agitate it every now and again just to make sure that there's nothing sticking to the bottom, but mostly you just want to have it on an even heat and leave it alone to cook. While that's cooking, so it's sitting right beside the bench, I got other stuff done at the same time. So I decided to roast some of the garlic. I just peel whole cloves. If I have heads of garlic, like if it was not an elephant garlic, it was a headed garlic, then I would just do the whole heads without peeling them. But I did peel these just because it was easy enough to do. Though I may not next time, because I think the peel protects the garlic itself from getting too burnt. So when the garlic caramelizes, the skins caramelize instead of the garlic. So we'll see. But anyway, so I just peeled it and put it in some foil in the oven in the cast iron pan. You want to low and slow it, so you're just going to put it on like 150, 160 to 180, depends on how much garlic you're doing and what the situation of your oven is. And with a little bit of oil and a little bit of salt. It mellows the flavour. It's perfect for so many things, but Darryl likes to just pull whole cloves out and eat them whole. So it doesn't last very long in our house. You can freeze it roasted like this too and use it just like you would any other garlic, but realistically we just like it spread on everything. So this whole batch will probably just end up being spread on breads and things like that as we're eating over the next few days. It was just a bit of a treat to do while I had the garlic out and was doing other things. With some of the other zucchini, we grate it for the freezer. So it works perfectly from the freezer for baking, like zucchini breads and zucchini muffins and things like that. But it also is good for adding to soups, or I like to add it to like my lasagna soup, the bolognese lasagna soup that I make, but you can add it to bolognese soups, anything like that. It will just break down in the bottom of whatever you add it to. The texture is not great when you defrost zucchini, but that's why when adding it to this sort of thing, it doesn't matter. It breaks down in baked goods, but adds moisture, or it breaks down in soups and stuff and just adds like a thickening agent and a flavour to it as well. So we just grated it all up. I used the Thermomix cutter because I have it and it's nice and easy to use, and just kept on grating it all. In between doing whatever I was doing, I kept an eye on the zucchini butter as it broke down and caramelized and turned into a butter. As I said, kept on agitating it throughout that time. I filled 3 1-gallon Ziploc bags with the grated zucchini. This would have been a good test run for the new chamber vacuum sealer, but I didn't have it at the time. So we just went in Ziplocs, and it's really not that big a deal because even if it gets a little bit freezer burnt, it's going to be used in baked goods or in soups, and it's not that big a deal. So I just, as I said, just filled 3 1-gallon Ziploc bags, got as much air out as possible, sealed them up, and stuck them in the freezer flat for use for whatever I wanted. There was a little over 1 kilo, I think, in each bag. So I will be aware of that when I go to use it for other things. I kept some of the grated zucchini aside to use for zucchini fritters for dinner. Now, this is a favourite. Like, I love zucchini fritters, and normally I make them quite a lot over summer, but because we've had such a fail of a garden this year, we haven't had an abundance of zucchini to use, which is unfortunate, because when you've got a garden with zucchini, you get fresh zucchini in every day, and so you're looking for ways to use it, and normally there's plenty of things that I do with it, but because I didn't have a successful garden, I get things like this where I get bulk zucchini all at once and have to figure out what to do with it, and we don't get to eat it fresh that much because I have to put it up because it doesn't last long enough, sort of thing. So I do a very basic zucchini fritter. I add a few eggs, some flour and some seasonings with a bit of baking powder until it has a consistency that will hold together on a pan. It's very similar to how I make my okonomiyaki, which I haven't been able to make lately because cabbages are very, very expensive at this time of year. So it's I like my fritters to have a lot of veg with a little bit of batter to hold them together. Some people prefer a lot of batter with a little bit of veg. So that's personal preference there, and you could just thin it out however you needed to do it. But I find that the liquid in the zucchini is enough with adding just a couple of eggs and some flour, a bit of salt and pepper, a bit of garlic, and that little bit of baking powder, and that's plenty. I also wanted to use up a bunch of the broccoli that I'd bought, so I got a whole box of broccoli in a styrofoam carton, but it will go bad if we don't get through it. I was going to consider freezing some this month, but the new vacuum sealer hadn't arrived again. It didn't arrive in time. So next month, if I can get a cheap box of broccoli again, then I will give that a go, because I've been meaning to try it, because we have a hard time getting through the broccoli before it goes bad, because it just, once it's still warm here and once it's home, it just doesn't last as long as I'd like. So for dinner tonight though, I filled a tray with it. I just cut it up into chunks, filled a tray with it, sprayed it with a bit of oil and salt, and put it in the barbecue to roast as a side for dinner. Once the zucchini butter had broken down to a little under half the pot's worth, I hit it with the immersion blender. I pulled the stems of the rosemary out first, so I left all the leaves in there but just pulled the woody sticks out, and just blended it until it was smooth and buttery. I did add a bit more salt at this point after tasting as well. You can add any flavour you want here. So if you taste it and it's a little bit bland, which it does depend on the quality of the zucchini and the amount of herbs and things that you've put in it, and how much you like zucchini too, for that matter, you can add more flavour here. Now, more woody herbs in the beginning would have been nice. Some thyme, some sage, things like that. But as I said, my garden is not doing real well, and I just don't have huge amounts. And a lot of my herbs I've let go purposely to try and get a better rate next year. My rosemary is huge, so it's fine. But I had to start a new sage plant this year because the old one died off. And I've got new thyme in there as well. So I had a whole bed of thyme and it died off and it didn't come back. And I had the same problem with sage. So I've started new ones this year in the hopes to coddle them through winter again. But the rosemary did fine, so I have heaps of rosemary, so that's why I use that. So I did end up using some dried thyme in it because I just felt like it needed that little bit more flavour to it. So taste it, add whatever you want here to bump the flavour up a little bit. I fried off the zucchini fritters in the cast iron pan with a bit of oil. I like them crispy, so I use that bit of oil in the pan, and I like to press them really nice and thin because I like them well cooked through, crispy edges. That's just my personal choice on how I make them. Part of that's also the fact that it's a lot of veg with not a lot of batter. If you got more batter, the batter heats through better and cooks better like a pancake. Like the batter cooks all the way through the middle, even with it on one side. Whereas I find if it's full of veg with only a little bit of batter, it doesn't heat through quite as well. So you need it thinner so that it cooks all the way through and doesn't end up sort of gummy in the middle. We served it with the roasted broccoli with a bit of the tonkatsu sauce that had come in the food hamper because it was suggested to me that the tonkatsu sauce was really nice with broccoli. So we did that, and that was rather tasty. The next day I kept going on the zucchini. I shredded a whole heap more to do some baking with. First up I did some banana zucchini bread. Now I based it on my banana bread recipe, taking into account the liquid in the zucchini as well. I decided to double the recipe after making a single and putting it in a tray instead of in a loaf pan. And so I decided that if I did another batch and poured it into that tray as well, that it would make a really nice sort of like a slab cake. And it worked. So I made that. So it was a double batch in one pan and then a double batch in the other pan as well. And I did manage to get a double batch in the Thermomix the second time. So I only did a single, like 2 singles in the Thermomix for the first one because I wasn't real sure how much I wanted to make. And the second time I did a double batch and it worked. Now I will try and put the recipe together for this as well. As I said, it was one of those ones that I'm going to have to look back because I sort of threw it together. It's based on my banana bread recipe, which there's a short and a reel for that, but it's slightly different because there's a whole lot more liquid in zucchini than there is in banana. Not a huge amount though. It wasn't overly different, to be honest, because banana has its own liquid too. But anyway, it worked out really well, and the kids really liked it and they would like me to make that again. I also made a brownie. Now I did some Googling. I've made sweet potato brownie before and everyone liked that, but I haven't made a zucchini one. I have made zucchini chocolate muffins though, so I assume it was similar, but nearly everything that I googled didn't have any eggs in it because the zucchini sort of creates enough liquid you don't need eggs. So I just followed, I didn't really follow a recipe, but I used that theory in the recipe. I was a little bit skeptical of it, so I sort of went how I went. I reduced the sugar compared to most of these recipes and the chocolate chips. I know that it's a brownie, so it's supposed to be decadent, but it doesn't need to be that decadent, not for our taste buds. Even with the reduced sugar and the reduced chocolate chips, it was still very, very sweet. I didn't want to reduce the sugar too much because if you reduce sugar too much in baking, then there's less liquid, and because this didn't have eggs in it as well, but I might play with it to reduce it a little bit more because it definitely was more, it was definitely far sweeter than it needed to be for us, for our taste buds, compared to what I normally bake, sort of thing. The kids really did enjoy it though. Again, I did a double batch, filled 2 brownie tins with it. I wet my baking paper to make it fit better in the tins because my baking paper is quite wide. So if you wet your baking paper under a tap and crumple it up, it's more flexible to stuff into the corner of the tins than if you try and just get it to sit in there without doing that. So I poured it into those tins and put it in the barbecue as well. The zucchini butter had gone in the fridge overnight as I just hadn't had a chance to go any further with it. I decided to put it in jars. Now, this is not cannable. Zucchini butter has a bunch of reasons it doesn't fit in the guidelines for canning. Zucchini itself is not recommended for canning because of the way it melts in the heat. So it's a low acid product, so you have to pressure can it. And when it's heated, as the butter shows, it compresses and falls apart and gets very dense. So the theory is that if you pressure can it, even if you put it in chunks in the jars, by the time the pressure canning time is up, it will have separated from the liquids and you will have this clump of dense product in the jar, and the heat won't be able to penetrate to the middle, and you have to, the whole point of pressure canning is that the heat gets to the middle of the jar and the entire jar of product within the time span required gets to that temperature and holds at that temperature for long enough to kill off anything that's going to be dangerous. So the guidelines don't allow for canning a zucchini on its own. I am comfortable canning a lot of things that aren't necessarily in the guidelines, but for this one I agree that it might impact the texture and the safety of it. So I freeze it. I think even if you were canning the zucchini butter, that it would probably end up with a funny texture to it. I think you could thin it down with chicken stock or something and make it more of like a zucchini soup. And then it would be thinner and it would be safer to can, but I don't think I really want zucchini soup on the shelf. I don't think it's something that we would use a whole lot of, and zucchini butter I really enjoy. So I just decided, I freeze it, and I have done it in various different ways, but I decided to use these salsa jars for this particular one. I only want to can it in fairly small portions. These are a 300ml jar, because we tend to use it either as a pasta sauce or as like a base for a pizza, like the pizza sauce for a pizza. It's nice warmed up with fresh focaccia dipped in it. That's really tasty. So like as a dip, things like that. So I only need fairly small portions of it, and I only make it probably only once a year, realistically, because we just don't go through it that quickly. Part of that is because it's frozen, so you have to remember to defrost it. But you can freeze in jars so long as they are wide mouth jars and you leave generous headspace to allow for expansion. So these jars are perfect for freezing this in it. Zucchini butter doesn't expand very much because there's not much in the way of water left in it after all this cooking down. But it still does have some expansion. So you need to leave generous headspace, a good like 2 inches of headspace, and wide mouth jar to allow for that. Otherwise you can have jars break. So it freezes well. Because you've cooked all that water out of it, it doesn't really separate too much when you defrost it, and I tend to just put a jar in the fridge the day before I want to use it. Again, that's why I don't go through it awfully quickly, because it has to be pre-planned to eat it, but when I do plan to eat it, it's tasty. For dinner that night, I decided to make green chicken curry. This is a dish that I love to fill with green veg like zucchini and broccoli and beans and stuff like that. So I generally make it at least once at the beginning of the shopping cycle when I have that to make it with. So I kept aside some of the best looking zucchini purposely for it, and I also cut up a whole lot of the broccoli. I followed the basics on the new brand of green curry paste I bought, which is Mr. Chen's. It was quite nice. It was possibly a little less aromatic than the Valcom, but it's about half the price. So we'll see how we go. I bought 4 of them to give a go in a few different ways, and we'll see how we go. I was looking at making some of my own for the freezer. I have made green curry paste before, but when I went looking this month at all the different spices, the lemongrass was very sad looking. Might be the wrong season for that. I'm not sure when lemongrass is the best, the freshest in the year. So I didn't end up buying all the extras to make it, because there is quite a lot of stuff you need to buy to make it. So I didn't do it this month, so I just grabbed this new brand, and they are about half the price of the one that I normally buy, so we'll see how we go. I cooked off the chicken, I added the curry paste and some coconut cream, filled the pot with the green veg, and added some more coconut cream to make it lovely and wet, which is how we like it. We like it to be a very soupy style curry, because that's the way we enjoy it. I used a full jar of the paste. I also added some fish sauce, some lime juice, and a bit of soy sauce. I cooked some rice at standard absorption method, but with some coconut milk powder mixed into the water as well. Once it was cooked, I also stirred through a tin of coconut cream and a teaspoon of sugar. This makes a lovely, flavorful, moist coconut rice, which is, again, how we prefer it when we're having it with a curry. It just tastes really nice that way. That little bit of sweetness of the rice helps tone down the heat of the curry, and we like that really wet rice to have with things like this. Everyone loves green chicken curry. It's a meal that we make a couple of times every shopping period. So long as I don't go overboard with the curry paste. This Mr. Chan's is mild enough that it wasn't an issue, but I don't generally use a whole jar of the Valcom without someone complaining that it's a bit warm. I suppose that becomes where I figure out the savings. Like the Mr. Chan's is half the price of the Valcom, but I probably don't use a whole Valcom jar in a meal either. So I'm going to have a play with it and decide how I want to go. There is the Maisery brand of green curry paste too, which I haven't tried. I've tried the red curry paste of that, but not the green. It comes in a lot smaller tin though, but if it's more intense, then maybe it needs less of it as well. So maybe that counteracts that. I'm not real sure. So we're going to have a play with the different curry paste and figure out which works better, or whether I want to make my own or whatever else. This is what the zucchini banana bake looked like once it was cooled. It was lovely and moist. It was well cooked all the way through. I cut it into small squares, and I just prefer that because the kids can have multiple pieces throughout the day when it's in small pieces. So we tend to just cut everything into small pieces, and then they can have that throughout the day. I put it in the containers, and I stored it in the fridge. And temperatures at the moment mean that things have a tendency to go moldy if they're left on the bench, so I like to store these things in the fridge. It just prolongs the life of them. The kids don't mind eating them straight out of the fridge. They can warm it up if they want to. The brownie was a hit as well. Darryl offered to be a taste tester. I tasted a little bit, but to be honest, it was just a little much for me. It was just a bit too sweet. If I had ice cream or something with it, served it as like a brownie with ice cream or whatever, it probably would have been alright, but I did find it a little overly sweet. If I make it again, which I probably will at some point, I'm in a really bad spot for the sun here. It's having to figure out a spot. The sun is setting, so it's reflecting really badly against, and it's behind the camera, so the shadow of the camera is on my face at the moment. Anyway, so I will probably make it again because the kids really enjoyed it, and brownie is always a winner, especially without eggs if I'm short on eggs or anything. But yeah, it was overly sweet, and I'll probably try and adjust that a little bit because it just felt a bit too much for me. I do try and reduce sugar where I can. I'm not too worried about it in general. My kids are pretty active and all the rest of it, so you know, having a bit of sugar in their diet is not a big deal, but if I can reduce it, then that's a burn as well. So I will probably make it again, but I probably will look at reducing that sugar just a little bit on that. So I got through the whole 30 kilos of zucchini, the guinea fowler heading over for dinner. I got the whole 30 kilos of zucchini done and processed. There's some in the freezer. There was the cake and the brownie was put in the fridge. We did a couple of meals with it. I did keep a few out that looked good for meals at other times as well. We'll see how they last. Yeah, it was great. So that was a really good score from the fruit and veg shop, getting that and being able to use that in a myriad of different ways. A score like that is always fantastic, though it does bring its own little, you know, group of troubles in that it needs to be processed fairly quickly or it can go to waste. And whilst it doesn't actually go to waste because it goes to the animals, which is great, it's still, the purpose was for us, not for the animals. So the purpose is to try and make it work for us, not for the animals. So, you know, we see how we go. But anyway, that was all the food prep and stuff for those first few days back from the supply run. The zucchini was that really big important part of that. And I will see you guys on the next video. So I will get it out when I can, and it'll just be the next few days of that thing. So we have plans to work on the buildings this weekend to try and get some more done there. Darryl's been out with some injuries, so we haven't got much done, and then James is hopefully coming back Easter weekend and we can get the roofing on. We're starting to push for time a fair bit here. This sun is in a really bad spot. So we're really starting to get a bit stretched for time getting this done before it starts getting cold again. But I just really want it done as well. I also have fertile eggs coming. I think I mentioned that last video as well. So I need to get them in the incubator. They should arrive tomorrow. But food prep is still ongoing, and I'll still get these voiceovers done when I can, and I'll get the videos out, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for joining me again, guys.